the cloud. Samia, did you really read about him for history? Hello, adorable, adorable. Yoshi, right?
Yoshi, yes.
I'm dying. Samia says, you just read about him. Oh, because you're taking class at BC or something, right? All these weirdo people who are taking like not AP US history or something that are doing that. Yeah. At some point, Decker and I may text a couple of you and ask you if you're doing summer school, and if so, what you're doing. So don't get freaked if we ask you that. All right, so the ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, today we are talking about an art piece and an artist that I think you will like. And and I'm going to continue section 2. I'm making Mr. Decker the co-host, and we're going to continue section 2 in SOSI. So as always, today is Monday. So Monday is art first and SOSI afterwards, unless you want to do it the other way around, Mr. Decker.
Bye.
Bye, Yoshi. Oh my gosh, so cute.
Sorry.
Excellent. So nope, look. Yeah, Mr. Decker has a young puppy and I have an old basset hound. Here's my.
He's very disappointed that I just closed the door on him.
I know, so sad. So sad. All right, well, I am going to mute and man the chat as always, and
alrighty.
Talk about, we are up to piece number 4.
And I realized since there's 18 works of art, I'm going to have to start going faster to try to, I don't know, I guess anything we get done during the summer is golden. I just feel like, oh my gosh, this is going to stretch. Art is going to stretch through the whole summer, but there's so much stuff. I started looking at this and I started thinking, oh, maybe I could fit 2 in, but then there's just, you start uncovering layer after layer of these people, and I just find it interesting.
I think we'll be done with SOSI roughly at the end of July, which is kind of how we tend to do it. So we can always start thing 2, whatever that may be, you know, or thing 3, you know, SOSI art and something
thing 3.
Chemistry. Thing 3. All right, I'm muting and you're taking off, and then we'll have our break and then we'll do some SOSI. Awesome.
All righty. Gotta do all the things right here and get this, and great, all these messages in my slideshow. Here we go. All right. So patience level right. And guys, the first thing I have to say, guys, gals, I say that all inclusive. There's just so much stuff here, and so much stuff here that the author kind of glossed over, and I'm not quite certain why, because there's just so much fascinating stuff. Maybe they didn't want to make it as long as the music packet. I'll blame that. Anyway, lots of links here. Patience level right, born Patience Lovell in 1725 in Bordentown, New Jersey. And actually, that's incorrect. In the Art Resource Guide, it says Bordentown, New Jersey. She was actually born in Oyster Bay, in a different state. Oyster Bay, let me get my notes. Oyster Bay, Long Island. Okay.
New York.
Yeah.
New York.
New York, Long Island. Yeah, we got to get that right. But she moved to Bordentown at the age of 4. So it's like, well, I moved to Arizona at the age of 3. So therefore I was born here, right? I don't know. Anyway, she was born on a farm with Quaker parents, and she moved to Philadelphia and she married a cooper, one Joseph Wright, who was an older man. And the reason we make that point is that he died after marriage of 20 years. She had young kids and she's got to figure out how to make money. And I did not know what a cooper was or did, and they still have coopers. And I actually asked several different people. Nobody knew. I visit my mother every Sunday. My mother is 101 years old. She knew what a Cooper was. A Cooper makes barrels. So you make all sorts of barrels. By the way, you have to curve the wood, and it's a long process. In order to become a master Cooper, you have to apprentice underneath a master Cooper for 7 years. It takes 32 slats of wood to make a barrel, and barrels are used way back then. You say, why is this such an important thing? Barrels are used back then to not only ship dry goods, but also milk and alcohol and all sorts of things. I mean, they're shipping containers. Somebody has to make them, and you got to be a Cooper to make them. The packet does not bring all this up, but I find it amazingly fascinating. If you want to know more about Coopers, you can click on here and you can actually get to current day Coopers and videos of coop making. Anyway, she needs to make money because her husband has died. So she and her sister, Rachel Wells, start creating these wax portraits. Both she and her sister had grown up making things out of modeling clay. And it was a hobby, right? But they knew how to do it, and they just got better at it. They're both entirely self-taught. USAD loves to, all of the following. Remember that John Singleton Copley was self-taught, and we can go through all that. Creating wax portraits, not considered fine art, usually relegated to shops and fairs and things like that. It's not great art. It's really been downplayed throughout history. And you can go into all sorts of different wax portraits. Let's see, I had a link. Some of this stuff I've noticed, it is loading, but it's kind of slow. There's a really interesting article here about Patience Wright and wax museums in general. Working with her sister, Patience created approximately 40 life-size sculptures, put them on display, and charged people to enter. Surprisingly, people paid the fee to see her work. There were not a lot of art houses in colonial America. The characters she created were extremely lifelike, and to add to the effect, she put clothing on her creations as well as gave them glass eyeballs, and she put them in scenes that were related to the characters that she was making. So it's like, oh, here's so-and-so in their natural habitat type of thing. So fascinating. She wants to get even more success, and she realizes if she moves to New York, she'll reach a wider clientele. So she winds up having shops and displays that she charges people for concurrently in both Philadelphia and New York. She goes to New York and Philadelphia, basically back and forth. She began by modeling small portrait busts and cameos. I have a bone to pick because the person who wrote this obviously knew what he or she was talking about, but I wonder if they assigned a graduate student. Most of the people who write these packets are college professors. They assign a graduate student to the glossary, and the definition for cameos in the glossary is a hard gemstone carved in relief and projecting from a solid background. Cameos often feature profile portraits. Well, these are not the type of cameos she was doing, and yet this is the official USAD definition. She didn't know how to carve stones. She was doing wax cameos. This is a collection of wax cameos by a guy by the name of Percy, who they don't mention. Most of Patience Wright's stuff did not stand the test of time. So wax cameos, totally different than the definition of cameos in the back of the art packet. It's not like it's an incorrect definition, but in context, it doesn't make any sense. She made wax cameos. She didn't carve gemstones. Anyway, she progressed to creating life-size figures of notable figures, like the Reverend Whitefield. Remember that he was the person that Phyllis Wheatley, the African slave, wrote an elegiac poem about. And he was the he was the pastor, or there's a different clergyman, I can't remember the word they used, of her patron over in England. And so it was all tied in there. So there's this tie-in between Reverend Whitefield and Phyllis Wheatley. And Patience also did the Lieutenant Governor of New York, a lot of famous people. So she was really, really well known for what she did. But there's a fire in her New York studio, 1771, ravaged, lost almost everything. She moves to London with her children in 1772. She set up a waxwork display to advertise her skill. And we're going to get into how she advertised. She was extremely theatrical. And we're going to get into this in a few minutes. She would, at the sculpting process for her was a performance event. And she also, she married a Cooper. They were Quakers. She didn't have a high society type of attitude. She spoke with coarse language, and she put on a show, and it was very different for London high society. And we'll get into that in a moment. So she received commissions from prominent figures in London society. These names are directly out of the packet: Benjamin Franklin, Benjamin West, King George, Queen Charlotte, the Countess of Huntingdon, who was the patroness of Phyllis Wheatley, and Sir William Pitt, Earl of Chatham. And this is the only still extant life-size wax figure that is still, well, that's why I said extant, that she made. There it is. And we're going to get into his specifics here. Here's a little wax bust of Benjamin Franklin. And by the way, when she went over to London, she, by happenstance, bumped into Benjamin Franklin's sister, and they wind up talking, and the sister introduces her to high society over there, and they have communications on and off over the years. So very interesting. The wax statues were fully dressed, fully detailed. They specifically mention eyelashes, glass eyes, realistically, that should say tinted, not tented. There's my autocorrect. Tinted skin tones. This is Sir William Pitt's wax figure, sculpted in 1769. Wearing a wig and parliamentary robes, right arm extended, holding a scroll, hands. They found this out after they cleaned the wax figure up 100, 150 years later, and they find out that, oh my gosh, this is incredibly detailed. Hands are veined and include tiny hairs. Facial expression conveys intelligence and compassion. Actually looks better head on, which I've seen a picture of it, but it wouldn't let me copy it. Wright referred to Pitt as a guardian angel of America. If we recall, Pitt was really advocating for the colonists and that they were being overtaxed. Vocal proponent of the colonies, Pitt was known for his defense of colonial rights against the Stamp Act during the late 1760s, when he served as prime minister from 1766 until 1768. Patience remained an outspoken advocate for American independence and the rights of women. Felt very inspired by George Washington's leadership, and she planned on a series of monuments, wax monuments, honoring heroes of the Revolutionary War. She actually wrote to Washington asking if he would sit for her. According to the packet, Washington replied he would be honored to do so. Some of the other research I've read tends to indicate that would be suspect. She also wrote to Thomas Jefferson, who never replied. She had a personality that bordered on stalking. In fact, we'll get to this in a second. Wright died before returning to America. Founding father stalker. This was actually an article in the Smithsonian magazine. The Madame Tussaud of the American colonies was a founding father stalker. Patience Wright remained independence-minded in her correspondence with Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson. And I'll hit some of the, I won't hit everything. Wright, a sculptor who created models of faces so like the original, they fooled many an onlooker, had shaped the most famous heads of the day, her two chief materials being warm wax and, as some of her contemporaries sniffed, a rather vulgar manner of relating to her subjects. To sculpt George Washington, to whom so many ardent patriots were fiercely devoted, would be a feather in Wright's cap. And it gets into her history, which we're going to get into in a minute because I want to get right into this. She kind of got screwed out of an inheritance through a trick of wills, and that's why she had to support herself and her family. Chance meeting with Jane Meekum, sister of Benjamin Franklin, afforded Wright an introduction to the who's who of 1770s London. Landing on British shores, she quickly found herself in a work in high demand. Armed with a letter from Franklin, she set about sculpting the faces of lords, ladies, and members of parliament, most of whom were unprepared for this Promethean modeler. That's what the London Times described her as, who wore shoes made of wood and kissed members of both sexes and all classes on each cheek. Wright's informal manner was something of a shock to the courtly set, yet not entirely unwelcome. Her base language and friendly liberties, coupled with her work in a medium distinct from any art yet seen, made Wright something of a novelty, wholly American. We're rough around the edges, right, folks? Rough-hewn but strong, coarse but honest, she was the new world made flesh. It didn't hurt, of course, that her subjects were members of the old world's uppermost ranks, and she delighted them with plain-spoken praise. Flattery, it seems, was a language understood by all worlds. And I'll end this section with this. Abigail Adams was an exception. After meeting Wright at a London party, she wrote to her sister, quote, "Her person and countenance resemble an old maiden in your neighborhood Nellie Pinnaman, except that one is neat, the other the queen of sluts." Okay, so here's a cute little video. I'm going to show this to you.
I was born on Long Island in 1725, but came to live in Bordentown, New Jersey at the age of 4. My father, John Lovell, was a devout Quaker. By age 21, I had become passionate about art, especially sculpting, and moved to Philadelphia, the center of the American art world. I married fellow Quaker Joseph Wright, and we moved back to Bordentown. Joseph died unexpectedly in 1769. My older sister Rachel, also a widow, suggested we start a business making wax sculptures. Although we soon had 2 thriving waxwork salons in Philadelphia and New York City, I moved to London, where Benjamin Franklin introduced me to important people who wanted to be sculpted. While they posed, I entertained each one with my views on current events. I shared my views openly and honestly with people of all stations in life, even the king. I was a strong supporter of William Pitt, who tried to reconcile the differences between the British government and the American colonies. Throughout the war that came, I used my wax statues to smuggle out letters to the Continental Congress, passing on whatever military and political news came my way in my many business and social conversations. I also tried to help American prisoners of war in England and supported efforts to compensate loyalists for their losses. I died in London in 1786, and my burial site is unknown. I had hoped to purchase a burial plot in New Jersey, but my death came before this was accomplished.
So she was very critical of the policies of King George III, who invited her to the palace for a portrait sitting anyway. This is prior to the Revolutionary War. Once the Revolutionary War started, she was excluded from royal circles because she was so outspoken, and now they're at war. She remained in London throughout the war, continued to ship busts to her sisters for display in New York and Philadelphia. Was she a spy? According to the rabbit hole research that I did last night, yes. Probably passed notes with political information gleaned from contacts with high-level British officials. Hidden inside the wax heads of her sculptures, past information on a Benjamin Franklin in Paris. There is a book. I would order it, but it costs too much. And in the notes on the book on smuggling And this is also, they have the Abigail Adams crunch, calling her a slut. It talks about definitely how she was hiding stuff in there. And so I was reading all the references and letters from different people. So very, very interesting. This is a book about Jane Franklin, Benjamin's sister. So according to everybody that we can find, she definitely was doing that. Oh, there we go. Sorry. What happens when you go the wrong way? There we go. So Robert Edge Pine, he paints a picture of Patience Lovell Wright. So we have to understand a little bit about the artist before we get into his artwork. Robert Edge Pine was born in London in 1730. He was a British portrait painter. He painted Benjamin Franklin's portrait while Franklin was in London. He also painted Patience Wright's portrait in 1782 after she had moved over there. He was excluded from the group that founded the British Royal Academy of Art. That's Benjamin West and his group. He is one of the artists we're going to study. He's also the one who told John Singleton Copley to come to London. And Copley finally came 9 years later after his friends threw his father-in-law's tea into the harbor. Robert Pine was sympathetic to the American quest for independence, but his career sort of was the opposite of Wright's. Wright was, in the packet it says, Wright was born near Philadelphia. Well, if Long Island is near Philadelphia, okay, but whatever. Wright was born near Philadelphia and relocated to London. Pine was born in London and moved to Philadelphia. I've got to write USAD on this one because Wright was not born in Philadelphia. So I wrote near Philadelphia. I don't know. Is Long Island near Philadelphia? What have you? Is Arizona near Bakersfield, California? I don't know. Anyway, rhetorical question. Robert became an American portrait painter once he moved to the colonies. Well, not the colonies anymore. Now they're the United States of America, I guess. And so he paints George Washington, and he paints George's mother, Mary Ball Washington. And this is Robert Edge Pine's portrait of George Washington. And here is Pine's portrait that we're studying of Patience Lovell Wright. Now, some different things I want to point out before I go on to the description, but this is the image that's in the art resource guide. She's got her right arm. This is her right hand, and we're going to describe it the way they describe it in a moment. Fingers look actively getting ready to sculpt. It's like, well, okay. And she's got this gauzy fabric in her lap, and she's got her other hand kind of underneath the fabric. And what you don't see that's hidden underneath the fabric is a large lump of clay. And I mean large lump of clay. And he's painting her as someone who's in the moment, as an artist in the moment of creation. She's about to create a wax bust of someone who is sitting for her. So he's painting a picture of her at work. Phyllis Wheatley, Scipio drew a picture which then was engraved by Archibald Bell, and it was Phyllis Wheatley thinking about writing a poem. And Copley painted a picture of Paul Revere holding a teapot that he made, and he's in his work clothes. So all of these so far that we've been talking about, they have this related theme of artists at work in the process of creation. Prudence Punderson, her self-portrait, embroidery, child, and the center picture was her about to embroider. And then we have the coffin on the end. All of these works that we studied, The person being depicted is in the process of creation. So Pine's painting seems to allude to Wright's identity as an artist in her creative process. Wright is shown with an intense upward gaze as though studying a sitter. Sorry, why did it go back there? I didn't want it to go back there, but I had to change that. As though studying a sitter. Attention is on her right hand. Nimble fingers look active and ready to sculpt. Okay. Large lump of wax in her lap under gauzy fabric, an allusion to her unusual working technique of using her thighs to warm the wax to make it malleable. We're gonna be getting into this. Her process almost gives the impression that Wright would give birth to her sculptures. She would model the bust under her apron, almost like I can do great art with my eyes closed, or at least underneath my apron, or in this case, the gauze. Pull the head out from under her apron, put finishing touches on it under the astonished gaze of the sitter. Famous artist's rendering of Ms. Wright giving birth to a wax bust. This appeared in the London Gazette. Mrs. Wright finishing a busto. And she's pulling, this is not a man, that's why I'm wearing the shirt. This is not a moon. That's no moon. She's pulling this wax figure out of her womb, so to speak. She's giving birth to her artwork. And she would play this up in this entire theatrical process of creation. And some people were drawn to it and found it amazing, and other people referred to her as a slut. So there you go. Just kind of interesting stuff. The process of sculpting in wax. Waxwork sculpting is an additive sculptural process. Now, they talk about different types of sculptural processes in section 1 of the Art Resource Guide, particularly pages 37 through 38. No, that's the tinting. Anyway, look in section 1. There's additive and there's subtractive processes. Subtractive processes when 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 Michelangelo sees the body of David inside a big block of marble, which he said he saw. It's like, there it is. He subtracts what he doesn't want, and what he's left is the statue of David. That's subtractive process. In wax, it's an additive process. Material is added and modeled to create forms, like clay or wax modeling. Beeswax works really well for shaping figures. It's pliable at room temperature, becomes increasingly malleable as the warmth of the artist's hands, or in patient's case, her thighs, softens the material. It melts at low temperatures and can be easily tinted when mixed with pigments. We talk about color and tinting and shading on pages 37 through 38 of the Art Resource Guide. It's a very organic process, traditionally used to create effigies that bear uncanny resemblances to human flesh. This is not Queen Elizabeth. This is not Ed Sheeran. These are wax figures. Some wax figures made from direct impressions of faces or bodies. Wax figures have been modeled throughout history, from ancient Egypt to the present, but has not received serious, significant art historical study. They don't treat it seriously. I look at this and I think, how incredibly amazing, how lifelike. There's a story that patients sculpted a full figure to Benjamin Franklin, sat him at a desk, on a chair next to a desk, invited important people over and said, Ben is in the drawing room. He's contemplating something, so don't bother him. You can peek in. And people would peek in and they thought they had seen Benjamin Franklin. Well, they had not seen Benjamin Franklin. And she would finally tell them that they hadn't. And here they were oohing and eyeing. And then she revealed the fact that they'd been, there was subterfuge. And hilarity ensues. And either you like something like that or you don't. So she had her detractors as well as her admirers. Very interesting person. Wax figures, one of the reasons probably that we haven't studied them a lot over time is they're really fragile. Many figures have been destroyed over time. There's only one wax figure that patients created, full figure that's still in existence, and that was the one I showed you earlier about Sir William Pitt. So I find all that stuff incredibly fascinating. Madame Tussauds worldwide chain of wax museums. Guys, if you don't think it's big business, Madame Tussauds does not just have a wax museum in Las Vegas. She's got one in Hollywood, Orlando, San Francisco, Nashville, New York. In Europe, Amsterdam, Istanbul, not Constantinople, Berlin, London, Blackpool, Prague, Budapest, Vienna, Bangkok, Hong Kong, Wuhan, Beijing, Shanghai, Chongqing, Singapore, Delhi, and Tokyo, Dubai, and Sydney. This is big business. And Madame Tussauds came around the same time as they may not have ever met, but they certainly knew each other. And it's quite fascinating, all this stuff. There was something else I was going to, in my research that I was reading, I guess there was a series, and I don't know what cable channel it was on. It's called Turn, and maybe something we all want to look into. And it was the story of revolutionary times and spies as turncoats instead of red coats and blue coats, turncoats. And I guess there was a series, so I'm gonna have to watch this. And in one of the episodes, Patience Wright is hinted at. They don't use her name, but they use her. There's so many different links that I found out. That's this. Oh, the video that I already showed you. It's got a full biography, further sources for reading and research, and I mean, just lots of interesting things. I hope I put a lot of interesting links in this stuff. I find a lot of the letters. This is not. How do I move this? There we go.
Todd, can I ask a question while
yes,
you're
absolutely, absolutely.
And feel free if we need to take a break a little early. I have lots to, because I didn't get.
Oh, good. Yeah. I didn't want to take up the whole time, but I wasn't sure how long this would take.
This is I love it. My question to you, and you, I'm sure don't have an answer, but maybe a thought on it is, why would USAD not choose the William Pitt wax sculpture as our art piece this year? If they're going to talk about Prudence Lovell Wright, why would they not talk about Prudence Lovell Wright? And then she's made dozens of wax figures that all relate to the people we're studying, but there's one that's still around, right? And that one that's still around happens to be someone who is part of the story. I mean, Pittsburgh gets named after him, and whatever. But
yes,
but why did they pick this weirdo old lady looking?
Right. Well, again, it's because of the theme of everybody that we've studied so far is depicted in the process of creation. And so Pine is depicting Wright in the process of creation, just like Scipio was capturing Wheatley in the process of creation, just like Prudence was capturing herself in the process of creation, just like Copley was capturing Revere, thinking about the process of creation, or perhaps thinking about the revolution, who knows, but they're all contemplative. So that's the link. That's to me, that's how they're doing. So yeah, I was confused at first, like, how come we're not studying this? And so we wind up studying about her as the subject matter. She is the subject matter, but it's her way that she created work that makes her an interesting subject. That's, since your question was, why did USA do that? That's what I'm thinking. And who knows if USA, I don't really know. Does the person who writes the art packet have a hand in selecting the artworks? I don't know. Because I mean, it seems awfully coincidental that everything here connects in this creative process vein. So I have a feeling that maybe the person writing the packet had nothing to do with what got picked. Maybe they did. I wish I knew. It was a good question. There was one other thing I was going to, that was this. In reading books, there's a book called Declaring Independence, Jefferson, Natural Language, and the Culture of Performance. And it's in a section titled Natural Theatricality. And they talk about Patience Wright, a remarkably talented Quaker woman who in 1772 moved from New York to London to pursue what the London magazine, dubbing her on her arrival the Promethean modeler, called a new style of picturing superior to statuary and peculiar to herself and the honor of America, a style that the hand of nature had designated her to provide. And it talks about this was utterly realistic, fully in the round, life-size wax portraiture modeled from life, remarkable for expressing the exact likeness of the human face and passions of the soul, as another London newspaper put it. The wax models whose sitters included George Whitefield, John Dickinson, Garrick, Franklin, and Pitt were finished with delicate skin texture and coloring, glass eye characterized by lids, lashes, and brows, and veins introduced under the waxen skin of face and hands. So realistic were they that Wright took pleasure in describing herself as the witch of Endor, able to raise the dead. And it talks about her shocking style of birthing the work itself, and her invisible hand, not Adam Smith's invisible hand, of how they sorry, I'm going back and forth with my dog here. Garrett,
Why Promethean? Prometheus gave fire.
Yeah, I have to look up why they used that. Why they use that analogy. I'd have to order some of these books. One of them is $12.98. I might order it. And another one's $342. I'm not ordering it. So it's just, you just never know.
June says that Prometheus crafted humans out of clay.
That's, oh, okay. Yes.
Oh,
he is
thank
correct.
God we have
Or
June.
not he, she, sorry, Yoon. Yes. Yoon, you are absolutely correct. I remember reading it. I knew that was in the back of my head. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. So just some fascinating stuff. And I will stop it right there. But yeah, Yoon, you are absolutely correct. It was in the back of my head there somewhere. So
I love it. I love it. What we'll do, if it's okay with everybody, is we will pause. It's 4:43. We'll take our 10-minute break and come back and pause the recording and come back. And I'll go slightly longer just to try to get through as much of section 2 as possible, so that we're not doing that. I won't show the old movies, but I'll do that. So if you have questions, feel free to unmute or throw them into chat. Otherwise, let's come back at 4:55. Great.
Turn off recording.
I am going to pause the recording. All right, I have resumed recording, and we're going to go through the share sound. I'm going to start just a little bit, not at the beginning, I'm not going to go through a tremendous amount, but I am going to, nope, that's not what I wanted to do. Can you all see SOSI section 2 and hear me speaking? I think you can. Are we good? SOSI section 2? And okay, perfect. All right, so just as a really brief recap, I won't show the videos, but I will remind everybody of what we started section 2, which is the war itself. The odds were against the Americans because the Great Britain had just finished whooping everybody's behinds in the 7 Years' War that lasted 9 years. They had a navy, they had 48,000 troops, and Hessian mercenaries, not to make, Hessian is like another name for German, not to lie that there were people living in the colonies really loyal to England. So like they had extra people, you know, locally, and the Native Americans. And here was George Washington with like 2.5 soldiers and, you know, no, whatever, everybody had like a pea shooter. All right, so today, I hope to get through the New England colonies and the Mid-Atlantic a little bit. We won't get to the Southern colonies, probably not this week. So just FYI. Remember that section 1 ends with the intolerable acts, which is what the Americans called them. Otherwise, you know, trying to, where the British were like, hey, you should do this. The British called them the Coercion Acts. So the British increased their military presence under the governor of Massachusetts, who was British. Remember, the governors tend to be loyalists. We have generals that are Americans, but the governing bodies, not the Congresses, but the people in charge, like the governors, they tend to be loyal to the British. Gage brings in all these troops into Boston. Massachusetts is like, yo, no, and forms a militia, which is gonna come into power. There you go. And they say, hey, the Continental Congress is like, hey, we'll meet again in May if nothing gets done. And Parliament in England sort of kind of slides in underneath that and is like, hey, they're rebelling. And General Gage is going to take John Hancock and Sam Adams, and they escape. And we have this whole question. I still have not figured out what kind of 1 if by land, 2 if by sea thing. They hang 2 lanterns, like I said, but they don't come across by sea. They did note that the regulars were coming April 19th, 1775, not the day that we declare the American Declaration of Independence. This is earlier than that. There is the shot heard around the world on the Lexington Common, immortalized by an American poet later, Ralph Waldo Emerson. And this is sort of where we left off on Wednesday of last week. The Paul Revere hears from the spy network of Americans that are loyal to America, but hear about, you know, kind of like Prudence, not Prudence, whatever her name is. Oh, speaking of which, side note, I forgot to show this. My mom created a book of all of the artwork. There's our art from today. And all of this stuff. So I am going to have this book, which you can take a look at any time. It's printed copies of all of the artwork that we are studying today, just so you can take a look at it. So I have this. When we get back together in person, you're always welcome to look at it. Worth doing it. She had it printed out at the UPS store. And if you live near Stockdale, there's a UPS store actually right near me. If you come just south on Buena Vista. It's about 1.5 miles south of school.
I ended up having to go to Staples because my UPS didn't have the heavier paper in the binding.
Okay.
So,
well, I will, you are literally at UPS right now. Well, you could ask them if they make a book, a color printed book, and bind it. It's not very much money. I think, what'd you pay for it, Mom? Do you remember?
Too complicated. I ended up paying because I brought it in on a You know, what are these little things?
Flash-
That's what I
flash drive?
finally did. Because Staples couldn't receive it, got a little more complicated than usual.
Well,
But-
we can definitely, we don't have a color printer that I can access at school. But, you know, I mean, I think it's pretty to have. Certainly you can,
It's great to look at. It helps me a lot.
it does to me as well. Okay, so this is kind of where we left everybody before. The British came by sea, not really. They really just kind of floated across the Charles River, which is the river. If you go to a school in Boston and you row crew, right? If you have like, if you're on the rowing team, you will row on the Charles. So the British came across and walked about 15 or so miles inland looking for the armories where they thought that the colonists had hidden their stashes of war materiel, which is like material but spelled with an EL, meaning like guns, ammo, all kinds of other stuff. And there weren't supply houses, you know, there weren't forts filled with guns and ammo and stuff like that, because anything that they had been able to collect that was in the hands of the colonists. Like they were holding those guns and everything else. Did I restart the thing? Am I recording? I think I am. Can we tell? Am I recording? I cannot tell. We'll assume yes. The British fired on the Americans, but retreated. Everybody lost men. The Americans used guerrilla tactics, and because they knew the land better. Hang on, I'm going to get why this doesn't land better. There we go. We are, hold on. All right. And here this is where we finished last time. So I am now going to go forward from here to this slide. This is where we are starting new this week. There is a fort in northern New York called Fort Ticonderoga. So this is New York City down here at the bottom where like the period is for NJ, New Jersey. This is kind of where we're going to get familiar with that here. And then this is Canada all the way up here. Vermont actually did not exist at the time as its own state. It's not one of the original 13 colonies. But Fort Ticonderoga, which is kind of all the way up north, it was considered a pretty useful outpost. It was, first of all, this, you can't see in this map too well, but there's the Hudson River kind of starts up north and it flows actually south to New York, but you can very easily go back up it. And they capture Fort Ticonderoga. We're going to hear again about Fort Ticonderoga because they're going to store things in it and then get them out of there. Or, you know, the British have been storing things in it. So Benedict Arnold is going to be one of these guys. He's a shopkeeper from Connecticut. He teams up with a dude called Ethan Allen, which if you grew up in New York like I did, there's Ethan Allen Furniture. So he sort of, his name is synonymous with, you know, I don't know.
Can I interrupt for a moment? I'm really
Yes.
sorry because I wasn't watching. Do you only just turn on that recording late?
No, it's been recording. I can see it over here, recording to the cloud.
Okay, because it's kind of blinking and it didn't ask us for permission. So I'm sorry if I
Oh,
wasn't
interesting. Yeah,
watching.
no, that I had paused it. I don't know.
Just a
I
pause.
paused it and
Okay.
came back to it. Thank you. No, that's perfect. Probably Ethan Allen, New Chippendale, who knows? Okay, so Benedict Arnold, his name is gonna pop up, unfortunately, again, a couple of times today, because he was this American hero and then he ends up kind of betraying the British or the Americans and rejoining the British. But at this point in the war in 1775, he's really pro-colonist. So he teams up with Ethan Allen, who was a leader of the militia in what is now Vermont, and they go and attack Fort Ticonderoga. The British had been using it to supply, to hold on to arms and armory and cannons and things like that. And as a communication link between like New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, like all these sort of middle state, parts here, Massachusetts, whatever, and Canada, which is where the French Canadians were, and the Algonquin tribes who were, siding with the French and everything else. So the British had sort of been using it kind of as an outpost. The Ethan Allen and Benedict Arnold come and surprise this very small, very unprepared British force up there in May. And the British commander was actually still wearing his pajamas. They take over and capture Fort Ticonderoga, and that will come up because it's going to be a decisive factor in this battle that's we're about to hear about. Okay, so meanwhile, that's happening like kind of as a side quest over there. In the meantime, back in Boston, the British retreat to Boston. So I'm going to come back over here to this map right over here. No, come back. No, I don't want to hear this stupid thing. Okay, here we go. No, come back. Okay, so Boston is down at the corner of this map. You sort of can't see it. It would be like off the edge, right at that corner right there. And they've gone to Lexington and to Concord. The shot heard around the world is up here in Concord, and then back to Lexington and back to Boston. Okay, so they're now chilling out in Boston. What does Boston look like? Well, if you keep going all the way down that path we just saw from the map, Boston at the time was really sort of a peninsula like Florida, surrounded on three sides by water. It's almost an island. Since the 1700s, it's actually been built up much, much more. They've like put landfill in here, kind of like Lower Manhattan. So this is actually sort of much more looks more like Florida, like an actual peninsula. But at the time, there was just this little teeny tiny isthmus. Look at me with all these geography words. A very, very skinny neck of land. In fact, it's called Roxbury Neck. And basically the British come and chill out here. And Boston is really strategically important because it's got hills. And when I say hills, I really mean hills. They're really not that tall. Breeds Hill is 62 feet tall. Moulton's Hill is 35 feet tall. Bunker Hill is the biggest one. It's 110 feet tall. So that's like 10 stories tall. So it's tall, but it's not like a mountain, right? But it gives you some strategic advantage a little bit. The Americans controlled the neck here, but first of all, there were like a bajillion soldiers that were British, kind of all sitting right here, thousands of soldiers right over here on the island or the little peninsula thing that is Boston itself. And second of all, the British have a navy, so they don't have to kind of wander across the neck here. They can just land their ships kind of anywhere they want to because they have a big navy. Navy's going to come up a little later too. Okay, so they basically controlled all the water in the harbor. They could resupply themselves easily and reinforce the 6,000 troops here. Definitely. So 1,200 American militiamen sneak onto Bunker Hill and Breed's Hill, and they construct a redoubt on Breed's Hill. That's like a little sort of kind of like a fortress. It's like a 3/4 enclosed thing. They basically sneak on in the middle of the night and they get up to the top of the hill and they build themselves like a little fort, like you would if you were going to throw snowballs at people. And it's led by a guy named William Prescott. I put that on so that you can come back and review that later. Exactly. And William Howe, the British general William Howe, decides to attack Breed's Hill and Bunker Hill. It's the Battle of Bunker Hill, but it actually really takes place more on Breed's Hill than on Bunker Hill. The packet says, according to British military custom, he attacked. I'm not sure what kind of custom is like, once more into the breach, let's all go die, the charge of the light brigade over here. But that they literally charge up the hill. Maybe they thought the Americans would flee. Maybe they were just counting on the British Navy to shell them with their cannons or something like that. So the British soldiers come across the Charles River and storm the hills. That's the Battle of Bunker Hill. The Americans are led by somebody fabulously named Israel Putnam. And Israel Putnam is the American general who says, don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes. Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes, meaning you can't reload your gun really well and they don't shoot very straight anyway. So wait till they're super close. And then it's like shooting fish in a barrel. Like you can just do that. So the British run up, the militiamen repulse them. The British run up again. The British repulse them again. And by the third wave, the Americans were running low on ammunition. It wasn't that they were dying in such huge numbers yet. They ended up fighting in hand-to-hand combat with them having the like upper hand on the higher edge of the hill. Eventually they lose. So if it is the Battle of Bunker Hill is technically a British victory, but there are massive losses for the British. They thought they would just be able to They lose 226 people, 800 are wounded, and the Americans, they just feel good about it. They are emotionally happy. They're all dead, but they're emotionally happy. They're not all dead because they don't, if they didn't have to kill them, they didn't kill them. But they are excited that they had done so well, and sort of held on for so long. Okay, so King George III, who was the king at the time, we all just talked about that. He treated the rebellion as a foreign war, something that basically was happening far away. It was 1775, so the Americans hadn't declared their independence yet. They were just sort of like skirmishing, and the British Crown issued something that they called a proclamation of rebellion. And I linked to this. This is actually linked to also in the packet itself. It basically officially declared the colonies to be in a state of rebellion. It officially declared the colonies to be in a state of the rebellion. And the Americans were triggered by this act. They were like, excuse me. And the packet says they developed a passion for arms, which apparently continues to this day. This passion for being armed and fighting for themselves actually has a name. Historian Charles Royster, and you've heard both Decker and I say that USAD questions love to say, what does this historian say about this stuff? So he labeled it a rage militaire. A rage militaire, a love of things military and an anger and a need to fire and shoot people and defend oneself. That rage militaire against the king, so King George basically escalates it again. And he says, oh, I see, you're rebelling. I'm going to quash this rebellion. And that brings out a lot of volunteers. They're like, oh, no, you're not. So, maybe if King George hadn't ratcheted up the odds, we might not have fought like that. By the end of a year, enthusiasm kind of, is waning, right? We're not having a quick victory. And so this rage kind of dissipates and everything else. And George Washington is like, oh, crap, I knew this was going to happen or whatever. And so he has to, excite his troops and train them and everything else. So we're going to learn how he did that. I don't know if you guys have seen Mulan. Are you too young to have watched Mulan, or have you seen Mulan? This is where they're all learning how to get trained. So like really, but I sort of imagine it is like. Okay, so basically Boston is now under siege, right? The Americans lose. But they're kind of on the mainland. The British are on the sort of almost island of Boston, the city itself. They have a navy. The Americans don't have a navy, but the Americans are rage militaire fighting away. And it's a stalemate for about a year, right? Boston bookseller Henry Knox is the one that we talked about at the end of that movie we watched on Wednesday, where he goes up to Fort Ticonderoga, the one that was taken over by Benedict Arnold and Ethan Allen in a not very exciting battle where the commander just surrendered in his pajamas. He grabs the cannons and the war materiel, 60 tons of cannon. And you heard them say in the movie, he did not lose a single one. 300 miles from essentially almost the Canadian border down the pretty frozen Hudson River and across over mountains. The Appalachians are right there. Through, I feel like, when you going on a lion hunt, up the river, down the river, through the on poor quality roads. He gets it, and he basically takes it all the way into Boston, to a place called Dorchester Heights, just south of Boston. It's again yet another hill. Hills are really important in Boston. It has a commanding view of the harbor, and basically General Howe sees this and is like, "Oh, shnikey, I gotta get out of here." So he leaves. He leaves, and he goes all the way north to Nova Scotia, to Halifax, Nova Scotia. I'm going to show you where he doesn't just pull back. He goes to Canada. Like, that's far using today's transportation. Like in a car, that's 7 or 8 hours by car. And so whatever. And he's like, he's sailing there. And Washington leaves for New York. We mentioned for Knox, Henry Knox, like I said before, he later becomes the Secretary of War after the war, and Fort Knox is named for him. Okay, so this is Nova Scotia, this like island thing off. Cracks me up. Like, he sails out of Boston and goes all the way to Nova Scotia over here. Okay, it's 3 days worth of sailing, so he really retreats. And he leaves on St. Patrick's Day. If you know, March 17th is St. Patrick's Day. They didn't say that in the packet, but I was like, hey, that's an easy day to remember. All right, so he's like, all right, fine, forget Boston. Boston is dumb anyway. They're too rebellious, right? That's like 5 times they use the word hotbed of rebellion, right? Everything else. He's like, all right, I'm going to go farther south, like to New York, forget Massachusetts. I'm going to New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, everything else. But it, of course, this success where you chase somebody all the way out to another country, really inspires a lot of young men and women to help the cause. The men join the army, the women tend to, help support things. One of his recruits who's going to come back to inspire us all is Alexander Hamilton. He was a student at King's College in New York City, which has been renamed Columbia College. It's just, I actually had my Sweet 16 there, if you want to have a little bit of background. And I put in a link to Hamilton College. If you know me at all, you know that I actually went to Hamilton College. I don't know if you can see this, but this is a whole, I put a link. Yeah, because Hamilton, because you should go to Hamilton. Before there was the musical, there was the college. All right. So the British General Howe, he goes up to Nova Scotia, as I said, and regroups for 3 months before he finally sails back to New York. So I've put this map up here because I think maps are really important. He comes back to New York and he lands on Staten Island. So Staten Island is like the Bakersfield of New York City. Like it's really, there are 5 boroughs of New York City. It's kind of like 5 areas that have joined together: Manhattan, the Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens, and Staten Island. And like Staten Island, like nobody counts Staten Island. It could be part of New Jersey for all the rest of us, we care, but it is in fact part of New York City. So he lands on Staten Island, and actually is like, hey, colonist rebels, why don't we make a treaty? Like, we could just end this, we like, we won Boston, but it cost us a lot, and wouldn't it be nice if we just weren't fighting anymore? He did not want to destroy George Washington's forces. That phrase, like he could have, essentially killed everybody who was under General George Washington and ended the war, but he didn't. Which is, I guess, kind of good, but also he could have ended this war. That phrase is going to come up like at least 4 more times, where it's General Howe had the chance to basically press his advantage and end this, and he did not. So the war kept going. They rejected his offer of like, hey, how about you surrender to us and we just call it even? And the colonists were like, nope. So instead, it says attached. I'm sure that means attacked strongholds on Long Island. So Long Island is, if you remember, where Prudence Punderson's family hangs out. Remember, the British kind of go there. They're loyal to the British, even though she marries a rebel. This is the art piece with the baby being cared for by the enslaved woman, and then her making a sampler, and then her coffin with PP, the embroidery. That's right. So Howe tries to negotiate at Staten Island, ends up taking over. Long Island is really big, and weirdly, Brooklyn and Queens are sort of part of the island. They're just like the sort of left edge of the island. And American forces were divided between Brooklyn, which is this borough right over here that's orange, and they end up and Western Long Island, which is kind of what it was, Queens and Nassau County and stuff like that right over here. And they were forced to fall back to Brooklyn Heights, which is now a very, very fancy neighborhood where the Brooklyn Bridge kind of ends. I dated a guy from there for like 5 minutes when I was in high school. And then they end up crossing this river that's here. Manhattan is literally an island, this kind of salmon colored, pink colored thing. Manhattan is literally an island. It is only 13 miles from the very, very north part to the very, very south part. It is on the west side is the Hudson River, and on the east side is the well-named East River. And so Washington is losing in Brooklyn and crosses over the East River to Manhattan. I mean, you could if you were a strong swimmer, you could definitely swim that. And people, I wouldn't get in that water if you paid me, but you could do that. You can walk across the Brooklyn Bridge, which goes right there and is, a very beautiful walk. Okay, so that is the New York Theater of War. I just to get us oriented, here's Boston. Here's where this map is. This reddish area is what is blown up here in this little key. And Fort Ticonderoga, just to reorient ourselves, is up towards the north end of where it says the Adirondack Mountains. That's where Fort Ticonderoga is. And if you want to know, see, this is Syracuse. I went to school right near here. Okay, just kidding. Moving on. Can I go back to the last slide, please? You know what, Jack? I'm going to give everybody an option to take a look at this. So you will have access to this and you can go. If you have a specific question, please feel free to ask. But I'm going to keep going and then you will have as much access as you need later.
Okay.
All right. So what? I'm sorry.
Thank you. Thanks. I was just about the Hamilton College.
That's where I went to school. So there will be 0 test questions on Hamilton College, but I thought I would link it to anybody who would like a small liberal arts experience.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, so like I said, the Staten Island Peace Conference is an epic failure. So instead, remember I said that this is Brooklyn at the edge of this map over here. This green thing is Brooklyn and Manhattan is right across the East River. This blue one is right across the East River. And there's a neighborhood in Manhattan called Kips Bay. I don't know who it is in Kips Bay. Like, I don't know who Kip is, but it is called Kips Bay. And so basically, George Washington crosses the East River into Manhattan and Howe follows him. He seizes control of what the packet calls New York City, which is fine with me because as a native born New Yorker, I am really, really biased. And I tend to refer to just the borough of Manhattan as New York City, like the city. Technically, all the colors that are on that upper map, the Bronx, Queens, Brooklyn, and even Staten Island, that's all of New York City. But the packet refers to when they say that Howe seizes control of New York City, they really just mean Howe seizes control of Manhattan, kind of. He definitely occupies Manhattan, and the American forces just keep running uptown. They run up the length of Manhattan and actually into what is now Westchester, like the area north of Manhattan, past the Bronx. Like they just keep running north away from them. So how the British kind of take over Manhattan. But again, second time, he doesn't kill all the forces or force a surrender or anything like that. So he loses the chance to nip the rebellion in the bud. This is again 1775 still. Washington is like, okay, just don't die, please. And so he just basically, his only thing is, if I can get the British farther inland, then their navy becomes less useful and I can kind of just hunker down for the winter. He basically is like, okay, we're gonna just keep extending the supply lines for them. Our war should just be defensive. We're not gonna try to take anything over. We're just gonna try to not lose. Eventually, Washington leaves and goes around the army. They actually have skirmishes in New Jersey, and they go around the army and down to Pennsylvania. So he kind of like loops around New Jersey a little bit. Speaking of Alexander Hamilton, who joined George Washington, he gets named the captain of the New York Provincial Company of Artillery. So provincial, we said, like the Provincial Congress in Massachusetts, means kind of local, and artillery is like guns and cannons and stuff like that. So he becomes the captain of like guns and fighting. George Washington is like, hey, you cool, and everything else. So he becomes Washington's aide, like his right-hand man. He ranks up to the lieutenant colonel, serves with him for 4 years, and he basically not only is in charge of fighting, he's also in charge of the correspondence. If you have seen, many of you have seen Hamilton the musical or hear Hamilton the musical. He's really, really good at like writing and persuading people and all this other stuff. And so he helps Washington write to Congress, to state governors who tend to be British, to generals in the Continental Army. When Washington needs orders sent, he drafts the orders, and he basically is both overtly, corresponding to people and also kind of covert intelligence, because kind of everybody's a spy at this point. That college that he founds is in 1793. It is Hamilton College has not yet been in the packet. Sadly, I'm just throwing in there that this is a thing. Okay, so jacket is not in the packet. Okay, so following the 1700s military customs, Britain halts all military campaigns for the winter. So it's like starts to snow, and the British are sort of hunkered down in New York and in Pennsylvania and in New Jersey. And they're like, great, all hostilities cease while it's cold. We're just going to chill here. The Americans had not decided not to follow that playbook. Remember, they knew they won emotional victories in Concord and Lexington and in Boston, kind of by doing the weird thing, right? In Concord and Lexington, they were the guerrilla warfare where they were, running on the pads and kind of using the lay of the land and not forming up and having like an official battle at sunrise, the way that the British were used to in their bright red uniforms that did not blend in with anything. And the Americans did not have uniforms because they were a bunch of farmers and coopers, barrel makers, whatever, butter churners. There's my thing again, right? Like everybody was just in whatever clothing they had, which tended to be the clothing that was the color of the animals that they were made from or the cloth they were made from. So they were not bright red like the British. So on December 25th, like Christmas Day, which had up until that time been universally the time out day, let's just chill out day, and continued to be like that in many attacks. The Americans launched a surprise attack on the German mercenary troops, the Hessian mercenary troops. On Washington and 2,400 of his men crossed the very freezing, icy Delaware River, then marched 9 miles to Trenton, New Jersey, where it was really cold and stormy, and the Hessians weren't even out patrolling. They had no idea what was coming, and they surrendered. This is actually one of our art pieces, so keep this in mind. We will get to this art piece, not the meme part of it, but the art piece part of it is actually there, and we will study. It's huge. It's a gigantic piece. It's like life size. Like that is actually the size of George Washington crossing the Delaware. Okay, so I have a little small video about it.
Convinced the rebels are all but defeated, the British spread out in numerous outposts throughout New Jersey. Washington must rekindle his army's confidence. He tells his men that if you will consent to stay only 1 month longer, you will render that service to the cause of liberty and to your country, which you probably never can do under any other circumstances. Thomas Paine writes a second pamphlet, The American Crisis, which circulates around campfires and steals the resolve of the patriots. On Christmas night, 1776, Washington makes good on his promise. He moves his forces across the ice-choked Delaware River. It is a desperate and dangerous maneuver, but it works. His men gather on the opposite bank, and Washington launches a surprise attack on Trenton, New Jersey. The Battle of Trenton is a stirring American victory. Nearly 1,000 Hessians are captured, along with 6 cannons and enough supplies to outfit several American brigades. 7 days later, Washington presses his advantage, outmaneuvering the main British army and striking the garrison at Princeton. He wins another victory and captures nearly 200 British regulars. With his army rejuvenated, Washington marches to Morristown and settles in for the rest of the winter. There is almost constant skirmishing between patriots and British foraging parties, forcing the New York City British-controlled garrison to rely on supplies brought by sea.
All right, so they kind of win, right, in Trenton. That's that whole Washington crossing the Delaware. So Washington comes back to Pennsylvania, to the state, right, to Trenton. I put up again this map. Here's Fort Ticonderoga up here, way far up. Here's Long Island and New York City. Here's Trenton, New Jersey, and here's Philadelphia down here. We haven't gotten to Yorktown yet, but this is kind of where we are. So Washington regroups in Jersey and in Pennsylvania with his prisoners of war, with all of his supplies. And they defeat the British 2 more times. This is not in the movie. This is I like those little movie clips because they help me sort of picture with the little rectangles kind of moving around. I like the visuals. But these are the words are what is literally in the packet and will be tested. So the Continental Army kind of comes back to New Jersey and has another bunch of victories, right? The Battle of Assunpink Creek and the Battle of Princeton. You did see the Battle of Princeton a little bit in the movie. Good college there too, if you're looking at schools. These are small victories, but they are decisive. They give the Patriots new momentum, and it revitalizes not just the army, but Washington as a general. Everybody gets better morale. More people enlist. People who were sort of on the, am I a loyalist or am I a colonist, are like, ooh, I'm going to go fight with the American army. And everybody kind of settles down in Jersey for the winter. And this is my underlining here. I just want to throw that out there, that the packet put that in there. Everybody, like right after the Battle of Trenton, Washington crosses the Delaware, they win in Trenton, they win in Princeton, and then they settle down for the winter in New Jersey, and they get inoculated against smallpox in 1775. Just saying. Sorry, that was a science teacher in me giving you a shout out for vaccines. vaccines. Okay, so that's right. Okay, so meanwhile, back in New York, General Howe is like, God damn it, like I just keep losing everywhere. He was not down in Trenton, remember? He's still like sort of in New York fighting things over. He's like, whatever. It's called the Battle of Saratoga. We're going to get to all the different things. Saratoga is in what I would consider sort of upstate New York, kind of like halfway. It's not quite at Fort Ticonderoga, but it's there. Okay, so he's down for it here, like in Philadelphia. How picks he's remember he's won in New York, right? He's taken over Manhattan, but he hasn't killed off Washington's forces, and then Washington left for New Jersey anyway. And General Howe is like, damn it, we need a victory on the British side. This is ridiculous. So he literally sets his sights for Philadelphia. Why Philadelphia? Well, if you've studied some of the world wars, you know that sometimes people make decisions about where to attack for emotional reasons, right? This is like the siege of Moscow, and so because in Leningrad, if you can take over somebody's capital city, you can demoralize them. So at this time, remember the colonies don't exist. Washington, D.C. is not a city yet. It hasn't been designed or built yet. New York is definitely a center. Boston is definitely a center, like of commerce and trade and everything else. But Philadelphia is the home of the Continental Congress. It is literally the governing area of what is becoming the rebellion. So General Howe is like, damn it, forget it. I'm taking over this stupid city so that I can, because New York is a prize, but like Philadelphia is where you govern from. So I'm going after that. Forget stupid Jersey, whatever, I'm doing that. And he also wanted to take over all of the Hudson River. So this is a map of the Hudson River down here. Again, Fort Ticonderoga is kind of up here. Here's the big fat Long Island. It looks like a giant cigar. New York City is right. You can't even see it right here. This little teeny tiny island is Staten Island. It's actually moderately big, but whatever. This is where I went to school, like where the H is in the word Mohawk. And so he like basically goes around and comes back like farther down off this map to Philadelphia. You can't see this because this is half of New Jersey over here. But he comes down to Philadelphia and it's like, oh, damn it, I'm taking over all of this stuff. Okay, so they have a plan. It was a good plan. It was a smart plan. It was not a plan that the British were able to follow, but it was a good plan to start with. Okay, so number one, British General John, I think his name is Burgoyne. I may be pronouncing that incorrectly. He basically is up kind of north. You may be able to remember him like a mnemonic device would be that he has, to me, the most French sounding of all the names, and he's coming from what is essentially French Canada. So he basically collects everybody up here. He's got British soldiers, he's got Hessian mercenaries, and he's picked up Canadian militiamen, right? So he's picked up some Canadians along the way. And he comes back down, he attacks Fort Ticonderoga and takes it back for the British without a fight, because nobody in America cares, because they've taken because Knox and it took out all of the supplies from there, so it is literally like an almost empty building. So fine, have at whatever. Not the Americans are like, oh, okay, so you have a building, that's cute, whatever it is. So he comes from the south. Meanwhile, he was supposed to be met by this dude, Saint Leger, who's not in any of the packet at all, but he's supposed to be met by Saint Leger and Howe, all coming together, and they were all gonna meet right here in what's now the capital city of New York State, Albany. Okay, so here comes Burgoyne with the French. Here comes Saint Leger also kind of from Canada. And Howe is supposed to come up, and the three British armies are supposed to meet in Albany and have this major giant battle. So Burgoyne comes south, takes over Ticonderoga, and basically just keeps marching south. Saint-Leger comes across and gets stopped by militiamen over here, by like in Western New York, not even close to anywhere where he was supposed to go. Howe is supposed to come back north. Remember, he's in Philadelphia. He's supposed to come back north, and instead he stays south. So he doesn't even come. So this three-pronged attack that is supposed to be from the north, from the west, and from the south ends up being from the north, nobody coming here, nobody coming here. Horatio Gates, who is the American commander in this area, is like, crap, I can't fight all these people. So instead of like trying to have a big battle at Albany, he just kind of guerrilla warfares his way out of it. He starts blocking the roads. So he screws up the roads, right? They don't have TNT yet, but he starts blocking the roads. He destroys all the bridges. He dams up all the streams. There's no food. He raids all the food. He sets fire to fields, right? He's like, okay, fine. You can be here, but you won't have food. You won't have water. You can't get your armies through. You can't get your horses through. You can't get your cannons through. Have fun with that. And basically, Burgoyne is like, oh my God, what do we eat? And he has to send his soldiers, instead of getting them ready for battle, he's like, please go find some mushrooms and like hunt some deer because we're all starving to death. And Howe was just like, this was a dumb plan. I'm not participating in at everything. So they have this sort of setup for a battle at Saratoga. They're gonna have a battle at Saratoga in the summer of, so now it's past the winter of the summer of 1777. Remember, section 2 is all about the war itself. We haven't talked about like the Declaration of Independence. We haven't talked about, any of that stuff, weirdly. This is about the actual war. There are some minor little battles in what is now Vermont. That is not, Vermont was not a state. It's claimed by both New York and Massachusetts. The British defeat the Americans at a place called Hubbardton, which is right over here. You can see like just over the border. This is New York. This red line is kind of what New York is now. And Battle of Hubbardton is like, I don't know, 5.5 minutes off, in Vermont, like off to the side. But the Americans kind of sort of win in Bennington and Freeman's Farm. That's over here again in what is now Vermont, but kind of was unclaimed territory over there. So they're like skirmishes back and forth and back and forth. And Burgoyne, who is still like, screw you, Howe, where the hell are you? Why are you in Philly? Remember, they can't call each other, right? So they have no idea where they are. And Burgoyne is like expecting to get joined by all these extra people, but all the extra people who are living in that area, JK, are joining the colonists and not the British. He found that loyalist support was, as he said, not as strong as he expected it to be. So that's a problem. Also, he was counting on the Native Americans to help out there, but the Native Americans are not really into helping the British. I mean, they're not really into helping the colonists either so much, but those are the Mohawk tribes, right? That Iroquois Confederacy, that's those 5, and then just getting 6 tribes of that upstate New York area. They're not jumping to help the British either. And so Burgoyne finally makes it to Saratoga. It says Sarasota, but I meant Saratoga, on September 13th. And he starts to construct defenses. So we're leading up to the Battle of Saratoga. He starts this big attack in the fall. This British commander is easily beaten back by the American forces. Burgoyne surrenders with, it says, roughly 6,222 British and Hessian troops. I don't know how that's roughly, but okay. He surrenders to General Gates, who was the one who was, coming up this way and burning all the bridges and damming all the streams and everything else. And Benedict Arnold is there, and Benedict Arnold is, for another time, a hero. Remember, he went and captured Fort Ticonderoga, which allowed Knox to get the stuff out of it. And now here he is. He's a hero over here. But unfortunately, first of all, he gets hurt. He gets injured in the battle. He suffers a leg wound. And second of all, the Continental Congress, the government, Washington, they're very busy and they don't like tell him how great he is. And so he's going to turn traitor later in the war. But here he was a hero. He was still on the American side. And stunningly, I mean, these are all like little victories for the Americans that are building and building and building momentum. Okay, we are, this is October 17th. I like this sort of picture. On this date in 1777, British General John Burgoyne surrendered his army. There he is surrendering, the red coat, surrendering to American General Horatio Gates, marking a turning point in the American Revolutionary War. And there they are, all the Americans looking cash and pretty cool. All right. So I threw this in there because it's the European powers are at this point in the war not still kind of standing back a little bit, and we're talking about like France and Spain and the Dutch, all these people. But the Battle of Saratoga is like, oh, wow, these Americans, like, you know, they're winning in Boston, they're winning in Trenton, New Jersey, they're winning in Saratoga, New York, like all of those are a thing. So, so this is you know, preview for what's going to happen. Okay. I think we're going to cover the war in Pennsylvania and then we'll maybe stop for tonight. So we're now in 1778. So the war has now been going on for since 1775 was the shot heard around the world. So it's now 3 years later, we're still going. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, right, Burgoyne is up in Saratoga and loses. Who remember was supposed to be in Albany, was supposed to be at the Battle of Saratoga, JK does not, basically leaves, and I've put this map with this dotted line over here, basically leaves and sails down around through Chesapeake Bay, which is kind of cuts off the state of Delaware, and goes overland and attacks Philadelphia from the south. Remember, he's doing it because he's like, wow, I want to own Philadelphia. So this is happening. We talked about, we previewed this before. This is like the details of how he captures Philadelphia. First of all, Washington is kind of in this area because remember, he was in Jersey. He easily, Howe is actually an excellent commander. He just can't keep, like he doesn't ever have it in him to sort of, you know, completely obliterate Washington's army. But he fights in the Battle of Brandywine. He wins in the Battle of Brandywine. I put the date in September 11th, 79. Todd, can you check when the Battle of Brandywine was? Because I feel like that's the wrong year. I may have mistyped that. And one more time, Brandywine is right outside of Philadelphia. One more time, he doesn't destroy the American forces and allows them to retreat. So the British come into Philadelphia in September. The Continental Congress disbands and runs away. And they fight again in Germantown, Pennsylvania, and Washington loses, and they erect forts along the Delaware River. And basically, the British are winning in Pennsylvania. So the British are winning in Pennsylvania. Unfortunately for the British, they're losing in Boston and in upstate New York and in New Jersey. So the British own Manhattan and New York City, and the British own Philadelphia. It is 1777. Ooh, okay. Let's hang on. Come back. Not yet. So hang on one second. 1777. Thank you, guys. Thank you. All right. All right. So it's sort of a stalemate this is what you need to know. This is the end of today's lecture essentially is just this concept that the British thought they were going to have this easy victory, right? King George III is like, ha, rebellion, colonies, let's just squash that. And here we are 2 years later, and the Americans have gotten some outright victories and surrenders. They've gotten some, the British have won some, Todd used the term Pyrrhic victories, meaning it was a technical victory, but they lost so much, it was sort of a terrible victory, a victory at a terrible, terrible price. And they've won a couple of places, New York City and Philadelphia being 2 great places to have won, but it's not enough. It's not enough. The Americans are, you know, kind of doing this. This story, by the way, about the terrier, General Howe's dog, and is not in the packet, which I think is really sadness, but whatever. Okay, so. Howe has won, but he's left Burgoyne out to dry over there. And, you know, there's just a lot going on. So let me show this little clip of the movie here. And then I think we will stop there for today and answer any questions you might have and go on. So this is sort of a recap.
In the spring of 1777, the British devise a plan to isolate New England from the other American colonies. 3 columns are ordered to converge on Albany, New York. 1 column is stopped at Fort Stanwix. 1 disregards the plan and instead moves toward Philadelphia, defeating an American force at the Battle of Brandywine and capturing the American capital. Washington attempts to recapture the city, but is defeated at the Battle of Germantown. Afterward, he moves his army to Valley Forge for the winter. The 3rd British column meets heavy resistance from partisan fighters, giving the Americans time to assemble a large force near Saratoga. The fighting at Saratoga rages from September to October. Victory sways in the balance. Finally, the Americans surround the British army and force them to surrender.
So I hope that those are you know, there. The links to these, it's a whole like 20-minute movie. It doesn't line up exactly with the packet, but close enough so that it really is I think a big help. Okay, and we will stop there with the Marquis de Lafayette coming up next time. Okay, so if you have questions, please feel free to ask them. If you are following along in the packet, we are basically at the Battle of Saratoga. And so we will be on, it's roughly page 25, And we should be finished with this part of section 2, like the southern colony. Well, I don't think we'll get all the way to the southern colonies. We'll get up to about page 29 on Wednesday. So we shall cover that stuff. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to stop the recording. If you have any questions, please ask and let me know. And otherwise, we will see you on Wednesday, we hope, from 4 to 6.